Hello and welcome to the Gary DeMar Show once again. I'm Joel McDurmon, your host for the next 10 minutes. I'd like to follow up on a program I did just the other day on the bill criminalizing homosexuality that is in the legislature in the nation of Uganda. As many of you know, this has been in the headlines in many places in the United States, particularly over the involvement of supposed right-wingers stimulating this bill and backing it, and also from the alleged influence of Rick Warren, the pastor of the mega church, Saddleback Church in, I believe, Orange County, California. Warren has come out and denounced both the bill and his involvement and his influence in the bill. And the last show I did was around his influence in that and some of the things he had to say. I ended that show with his defense against the death penalty. When he was asked, do you support the death penalty for homosexuals? He put it this way: absolutely not. All life, no matter how humble or broken, whether unborn or dying, is precious to God. My wife Kay and I have devoted our lives and our ministry to saving the lives of people, including homosexuals, who are HIV positive. It would be inconsistent to save some lives and wish death on others. We're not just pro-life, we are whole life. He based his statement on what he called the greatest commandment, which was Jesus teaching us in Matthew 22, 37 through 40, that love your neighbor as yourselves. I commented last time that that is not the greatest commandment. Jesus particularly says in that passage it is the second greatest commandment. The greatest commandment is thou shalt love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, with all your strength. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like unto it, thou shalt love your neighbor as yourself. So, nevertheless, not only was Warren wrong about that, he had God and man in reversed order. He's saying we should love man. That's the greatest commandment. That's probably where the distortion starts. Maybe, I don't know if his thought is consistently thought out like that or not. Is all life, whether unborn or dying, humble, broken, homosexual, or whatever, is all life precious to God? You know what? Maybe there's a sense in which we can say that. But what Warren doesn't talk about are the legal aspects that are very clearly revealed in the Bible. Nowhere in his statements, in fact, nowhere in his writings that I know of, has he addressed the fact that God has clearly revealed homosexuality as a capital crime. This is a whole list of crimes. Now, the usual way of treating this in the Christian community is what appeared, well, is what it appeared in many places. Liberal scholars, even conservative and neo-evangelical scholars. But most recently, after I did the show, we spurred a lot of dialogue on Facebook and in our forums on it. And the arguments always come out. The death penalty for homosexuality is horrible. And so I challenged the gentleman who said this. You're saying the death penalty is horrible. And he says, no, I'm not saying the death penalty is horrible. Homosexuality and murder are not on the same plane. I'm saying the death penalty is horrible if the only reason you do it for is because a person is accused of homosexuality or convicted of homosexuality. That to me is inconsistent. Where do you get the right to pick and choose your Old Testament laws for which ones are the death penalty? God clearly revealed a whole string of them that carry the death penalty. When people try to just wave the book of Leviticus off in general, that causes problems as well. Here's a list of some of the things that Leviticus condemns. I've just taken this directly out of Gary North's commentary on Leviticus. The section, chapters 18 through 20 of Leviticus, forbids sexual contact between close relatives. Is that annulled today? Leviticus prohibits child sacrifice, passing through Molech's fire. Has this law been annulled because Molech is no longer worshipped? Leviticus prohibits theft and lying, defrauding a neighbor, rendering unjust judgment in Leviticus 19:15. Are these laws also annulled? It prohibits making a prostitute of one's daughter. It prohibits the mistreatment of resident aliens. It prohibits false weights and measures. It prohibits children from cursing parents. It prohibits bestiality. Are these two merely holiness code artifacts? Gary North's got a point. Taking that to the particular laws that carry a death penalty, we have even greater issues. Murder obviously carries a death penalty. In some cases, rape carries a death penalty. There are several laws that carry a death penalty. Homosexuality is one of them. So is adultery, and that will come up in just a minute. My question for now is, where do you get the right to say all life is precious in God's sight and therefore we shouldn't have a death penalty for homosexuality when God clearly says otherwise? If all life is precious, then why did God institute death penalties at all? This is a question rarely discussed by these evangelical leaders. I would like to hear Rick Warren's take on that issue, and if he does, of course, I pretty much know what he would say. He would probably take the Leviticus as abrogated type defense, and then of course he would have to answer all the other questions. The problem with that defense is the so-called greatest commandment that he mentioned, love your neighbor as yourselves. Jesus was not giving that as a new commandment. He was not making it up. It was not the grace being instilled in place of Old Testament law. It was, in fact, Jesus quoting Old Testament law. In fact, he was quoting the very section of laws we're dealing with right now, Leviticus 19:15. You do not do injustice to your neighbor. Leviticus 19:18. Love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus said that's the second greatest commandment. So if you want to wave off the Old Testament laws, you have to wave off that one too, which Jesus quoted, and you can't call it a Christian law anymore. So you have to, if you want Jesus, you have to have Moses as well, and if you want Moses, you have to have Jesus as well. And Jesus said as much, by the way, in the book of John, if you believe Moses, you would believe me. My problem with what Uganda is doing is not that they are imposing the death penalty for homosexuality. I think that in a certain place in society, when most of the society is Christian, is biblical, that it is perfectly normal. It should be definitely should be in place. Homosexuality should receive the death penalty. The point is that in a mostly Christian nation, that will be a very rare occurrence, if at all. I want to read to you something that one of the Ugandan representatives said in defense of this bill. First of all, it only proposes the death penalty for those convicted of having gay sex with disabled people and those under the age of 18. In other words, people committing these acts on people under the age of 18. And it would give the same punishment to anyone infected with HIV who has sex with someone of the same gender. So there are a very limited number of circumstances. What he says here is what I found was very important. Bahati said this bill would protect children, youths, and the traditional family. The penal code outlaws unnatural sex behavior, but it does not clearly outlaw homosexuality, which has become a very big problem in Uganda. Bahati said there is a lot of recruitment of gay people in single-sex schools and a lot of promotion of homosexuality by non-governmental organizations, including UNICEF. In other words, this is an act to stymie the leftist infusion of culture in their nation by leftist organizations like the United Nations and their, quote, organizations to advocate on behalf of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender citizens. We should be so lucky in the United States to have a law that would stop these people from spreading their doctrine as normal. And you read all of these news reports that are condemning what's going on in Uganda, and you find that consistently it's leftists writing them, consistently it's leftists assuming that homosexuality is normal, and anybody who doesn't agree with it is homophobic. Uganda doesn't believe that way. Uganda has a different set of values. And when the democratic machine, and from what I hear, 95% of the people in Uganda support this law, when the democratic machine turns against the liberals, they are up in arms. Oh, something's wrong here. A final point to be made, and this is my greatest criticism of Uganda, is they're not consistent with the death penalty. If they're going to go to the Old Testament law, they're going to go to Christian convictions about the death penalty, they should also make the death penalty for adultery and for other things. A law just came out recently that banned female circumcision, only gives a 10-year jail sentence for people who do it. Even if it kills the daughter, it is only a life sentence in prison. Okay? This is inconsistent. In Uganda, if you're going to go to old biblical law, you need to be consistent with it. Thank you for joining me, and we'll be back next time here on The Gary DeMar Show.